Noted. So good evening, everyone. My name is Abby Currier, and I'm the Community Engagement and Events Coordinator here at the History Center of Olmsted County. I'm so excited to see everyone on here tonight, and I look forward to learning more this evening about the evolution of the Minnesota farmer. Here at the History Center of Olmsted County, we invite people to gather, socially distant of course, and explore and examine our past as we educate ourselves about the stories of Olmsted County in southeastern Minnesota. We are so excited that you have decided to join us tonight as we take a look at one of these stories. Tonight, we are going to have a presentation from Samantha Mayer on From Oxen to Automation, the Evolving Minnesota Farmer. After her presentation, we will have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. During her presentation, feel free to put any questions that you may have in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can. You can find the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. It should be a little speech bubble. But before we can get started, I just want to go over a couple of logistical things. For tonight, we are going to ask that everyone stay muted so that we can listen to our speaker. Like I said, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can. We may also put some links in the chat throughout the night, so make sure you keep an eye on it. Anything that we put into the chat, we will be sure to send to you tomorrow, along with a quick survey about tonight's program. The survey takes less than 2 minutes to fill out, and we really appreciate your feedback. We also recommend watching this in presenter view, but if you want to see everyone participating Brady Bunch style, you can do that by clicking on the View button in the upper right-hand corner. If you're joining us from an iPad, you may have to swipe a couple of times to change the view on your screen. We are recording tonight's program, so please keep that in mind. We're so excited about tonight's talk, and we hope that you will continue to join us for some of our future events, where we're going to talk about everything from voting rights in Minnesota to cave exploration, to the history of symbols, and everything in between. These talks are one of the many great benefits to having a membership to the History Center of Olmsted County. We certainly hope that you will continue to join us for these talks, and we also hope that you will consider getting a membership to experience even more benefits. Tonight, we are joined by Samantha Mayer, who is the Program Director at Farm America. She joined the Farm America team in the fall of 2019 with a degree in elementary literacy education and a STEM certificate from Minnesota State University, Mankato. From the planning of special events to student outreach, she brings not only a passion for education and youth programming, but a contagious excitement for agriculture and the outdoors to all of her projects at Farm America. And we look forward to hearing some of that tonight. Sammy?
Thank you, Abby, for the introduction. I will jump right into things. Yes, my name is Sammy or Samantha. I go by Sammy, Sam, whatever the preference is, I accept it all. And tonight we are going to be talking from Oxen to Automation, the Evolving Minnesota Farmer. And so we are going to work our way through the technological advances of Minnesota farmers and how they have been working towards stewardship and sustainability in all of their practices. Before we get into anything, I will click through here just to the next slide. I have a few slides to share with you as I'm speaking this evening, and they should be showing through on your screen. The first, I'm just going to start with a general introduction of Farm America and what we do. We are Farm America, Minnesota's Agricultural Interpretive Center. We are located in Waseca, Minnesota, just off of Highway 14. And we have been an organization, a nonprofit, since 1978. We were established by the Minnesota State Legislature to tell the story of Minnesota's agricultural heritage. And we tell that story from past to present, and then now we're working on going into the future as well, and all of the legacy that agriculture has left and what it will continue to leave in Minnesota and on the whole entire United States as well. So we tell this story on 360 acres of land that was donated to us. We have over 20 historic structures, and we offer guided tours, self-guided tours, that you can explore those historic structures and learn about Minnesota's agricultural history along the way. You can also do this via our app. So if you've never been to Farm America before and you're looking for a taste of what it is like without, maybe you're not able to make the trip over from the Rochester, Olmsted area, but we do have an app that offers an audio tour. And so you can download the app, get an exploration tour of Farm America, virtually explore all of our sites, and then maybe it will entice you to come see our sites in person. We not only offer those guided tours and those self-guided tours, but we also do special events, school field trips, which we are so glad to have started back up here in the spring, and other things like summer camps. Some of our special events include goat yoga, Meetapalooza, all with an agriculture focus. And so you may not think you're coming to learn about agriculture, but we will try to add something in there at the very least to trick you into learning something about agriculture in a fun and hands-on way. So if you've never been to Farm America before, you're just tuning in and learning about us now, I hope that this entices you to come visit us in the future and let us know that you watched this talk, and we would be happy to help you explore further and answer any of your questions that you have, maybe even after this program while you visit us on our site. Here is just an overview of our site, the 360 acres. The view that you're receiving now from this photo is 120 acres of what I call our interpretive space. I don't think that's its official title, but within this interpretive space, like I said, we have those 20 historic structures, not as historic, but officially 20 years old now, so I don't know if you can count that as historic, but our visitor center, front and center here, where we host many of our events, where you are greeted by myself or our executive director, Jessica, who's also on the call tonight. She may jump in with a few things, and she may, I'm not sure if she has to jump off early, but she may be available at the end for questions. But our visitor center, front and center there, and then you can see our Prairie Interpretive Center here. Further off to the left is our 1850s settlement, and then we also have our one-room schoolhouse, our country church, our 1930s farmstead with all of our farm livestock animals, our feed mill and classroom space, and then our blacksmith shop over here. And then in addition to this space, we have an extensive collection of agricultural implements and other equipment. And so again, we would love for you to come and visit us in person soon, since we are allowed to do that now at this stage in what we've all been experiencing. Moving on, before we begin this talk today, and we're talking about the progression of agriculture and the technological advances, we are starting mostly when the settlers arrived in Minnesota. And so prior to this, we know that agriculture was happening in Minnesota before settlers even arrived. And so I would just like to take time to acknowledge that the land that Farm America sits on and educates folks about this agricultural history does happen to sit on Native American and Indigenous lands. And so our community of Waseca, and where Farm America is located, I'm going to have my sheet here, try to share these communities with you as best I can, is operated on Native American and Indigenous lands, specifically the Ocheti, Shakowin, Wapikut, and Wapatan tribe land. And so I just wanted to mention that briefly before we get in to the bulk of our talk today, and that these original stewards of our land had a respectful relationship with this land and took their responsibility of stewardship very seriously. And I just wanted to note that. And our presentation today focuses on the development and technological advances, specifically in modern agriculture structures with which we are familiar today. That jumble of words, onwards, we will get into our presentation now. And I am going to let the slides do the talking, and my voice will be present. I just want to double check, Abby, have I been cutting out at all?
You only did once at the very beginning, but otherwise not since then. And I'll let you know if you cut out and I think we're missing something.
Perfect. All right. Without further ado, we will start with a brief definition of stewardship and sustainability. And so why would we be focusing on stewardship and sustainability? We will get into that, but I wanted to share that the word and phrase sustainable agriculture has and will be a buzzword for a while, and it can take on different meanings and interpretations depending on what scope and what lens you are observing this phrase through. And so today we are going to specifically look on to the stewardship and the sustainability of land and crop production. As we know, there are many other forms of sustainability out there regarding livestock care, other forms of sustainability that don't necessarily relate directly to agriculture, but practices that we can have. Today, we are going to focus on the sustainability of agriculture and the land and crop production that partners and pairs well with that. So here is a quote that I was able to find that I think encompass that pretty well. I will read it aloud for you. It is from a sustainable agriculture article, and it shares sustainable agriculture does not mean a return to early or low yields or poor farmers that characterized the 19th century. Rather, sustainability builds on current agricultural achievements, adopting a sophisticated approach that can maintain high yields and farm profits without undermining the resources on which agriculture depends. And so what we're going to be talking about tonight really encompasses this entire phrase. And we will start with learning a little bit about why we would focus on sustainability and stewardship in farming specifically. So looking through this lens that I just described, I will mention whether we currently work or live in agriculture-related fields or not, agriculture touches our lives and your lives every day in almost everything we do. And the ag processes provide the food, fuel, and fibers and forests that we use each and every day. And so to get a little bit of a better feel for this, I am going to kind of invite you in just a mini exploration session. So I would like you to find something around your room, if you can, wherever you're sitting from. It could be a desktop calendar, it could be a box of tissues, it could be a pen that you're using to take notes, it could be a beverage that you are choosing to consume during this time with us, it could be a snack that you have at your side. But I challenge you to look at whatever you have near you, pick one object, and find a connection to agriculture. It could be the packaging, the paper label that is on a product. It could be the ink in a pen that could be coming from a soybean crop. It could be your snack that is originally sourced from an agricultural source or a natural resource. But the importance of this activity is to share just how much of an impact agriculture has on our everyday lives. And so I will give a few seconds if anyone is brave and they feel like they would like to share something around them that they can make a connection to agriculture with. I can get started here actually. So I will share one of the things I'm able to make a connection with is my juicy fruit. So my Wrigley's Gum Juicy Fruit, excuse me. And I can trace either the paper that's used for the container to give me my juicy fruit back to agriculture. Forestry and farmed lumber is a part of agriculture. And so this paper product can be connected, its original source can be agriculture, as well as some of the ingredients that are actually in the gum that we consume. So that is just a very simple example of how we can tie something that we use every single day back to agriculture. If we have time, I'd invite someone to share if they are feeling bold. If anyone would like to unmute for one moment and share something around them that they were able to think is related to agriculture.
I have a oatmeal chocolate chip cookie from the Alternative Baking Company.
Excellent. Yes. Oats and the production of oats specifically is a big one. Those oats had to be produced from a farm. The chocolate chips have also come from the original source of the earth and farming practices. Excellent. Anyone else want to share an example?
I just ate some wheat thins.
Perfect. These are all excellent examples. Yes, wheat is a good one. And right in the name, you can hear one of the main ingredients, wheat. And that is coming mainly from farmers and production of agriculture.
I'm currently going to have a salad and chicken for supper, so.
Excellent, excellent. So even in addition to food products, some of our paper products, everyday products, even products, my favorite example, corn products, corn and the byproduct cornstarch is found in spark plugs in some vehicles. And so agriculture doesn't only provide food, it's important to remember that it provides those fuels, fibers, and timbers that we use in almost every single aspect of our life. So I invite you beyond this presentation to consider looking in some of the products that you use every day, some of the things that you might find are unexpectedly connected to agriculture. So why would this be important? So agriculture, we know now, plays an immense role in our lives, and farmers and agricultural workers are always concerned and working towards land stewardship. This is incredibly important because if you are not aware yet, our current world population stands at about 7.6 billion people. That's a lot of people, and it has grown exponentially in the last 50 years or so, and it's going to continue to grow into the future as well. It's projected to reach about 10 billion by the year 2050, and that may seem far away, but it is in fact less than 30 years from now. And with that, we are going to need to continue to produce those foods, fuels, fibers, and lumber for that growing population. And with a growing population comes the need for more land use. And so if there's more humans on Earth, we can assume that they will need more space to live a productive life, and we may see a decrease in land specifically set aside for agricultural production. So farm workers, agriculture workers are looking continuously for ways that they can improve this land stewardship, using less land to produce more of these things that we use each and every day. Additionally, the United States is the world's top food exporter, which is incredible. And close to home, Minnesota is the nation's 4th largest agricultural producer in the nation. And so we can be proud of that as Minnesotans. We can work our way towards the top and take note that we are in top 5 of all of those production processes in agriculture. So how did we get here? How did we get to the point where we need to be concerned with the sustainability of agriculture? And how can we continue to move forward into the future with this as a goal? We tell this story at Farm America beginning in the 1850s right now. And so this is a general overview of some of the large events that happened in that century that led to the large, the large use of agriculture in our area. And so here's a quick overview. In 1851, the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux. In 1858, May 11th, Minnesota became the 32nd state to be added to the Union. And in 1862, the Homestead Act. So these were large events that drew people to our area. However, settlers were joining other settlers and pioneers in southern Minnesota before even these dates as well. So when most folks were coming to the area, they were doing a type of farming called subsistence farming. And so this meant that they were coming to our land and they were looking for land that was going to be able to be cultivated to feed basically just their family. And if they had any additional supplies, it would be used to trade for other supplies that they needed to keep growing that food for their family. So when settlers arrived in southern Minnesota, they would only bring supplies often to start cultivating their land and anything that was important for their families functioning that they could either carry themselves or fit in a wagon that they were pulling across the nation. So as more and more settlers came and this land opened up to them, it was made available. The 1851 Treaty of Traverse des Sioux was a large proponent in this rush to Minnesota, specifically southern Minnesota. And this treaty was signed in July of 1851, and it led to a great rush to the southern Minnesota area. And it was the fertile land that was acquired by the United States was made popular, and settlers knew that this fertile land was going to be an excellent resource for them. And so a quote from a historian reads, "Cheap fertile land was the chief reason for the great settlers' rush to Minnesota between 1854 and 1857. And during this time, over 5 million acres of public land were sold." This land was sold at a much reduced rate compared to today. 1 acre, which is about the size of a football field, could be sold at that time with a value of $1.25 to anyone that was looking to purchase land to cultivate. So that was purchasable land made available by the treaty. Following this, the Homestead Act in 1862 was signed into law, and this gave homesteaders 160 acres of land, again valued at that $1.25 mark, and they could keep this land free of charge if after 5 years they were able to improve the plot by cultivating the land and building dwellings on it. So it's estimated that this act brought nearly 75,000 new settlers to the area in its first 3 years. And during this time is when the commercial corn and wheat belts began to develop. And so southern Minnesota particularly was a large home to wheat production. Wheat production occupied the newer and cheaper land west of the corn areas, and it was continually being pushed west as the land value was rising. And so this in combination with the expanded market demand for agricultural products, brought the adoption of improved technology to the area and resulted in increased farm production. And so we're moving from that subsistence farming into commercial farm production, where farmers were able to cultivate the land and make profit from their land by selling what they grew. And so by 1899, Minnesota was the union's #1 producer of wheat, with just over 95 million bushels produced, and it was over 14% of the national total in wheat production. Over time, this changed as the price of wheat declined because so much wheat was being produced. Farmers did not find that crop to be lucrative anymore for them to make money. So they changed to more lucrative cash crops and crops that were specifically more suitable to the land in southern Minnesota. We know now that these crops are corn and soybeans primarily, though wheat is still grown in Minnesota, mostly in the northwestern regions of Minnesota. But as this production continued, some of the technology, and the focus of our talk tonight is the progression of this technology. So many settlers would use either people-powered or animal-powered cultivation techniques. And so one of the main techniques was oxen. And so today we will start with the oxen, from oxen to automation. This was typically done with 1-row plows to cultivate their land and begin preparing it for planting. Farmers would also typically hand sow the seeds, so they would either get a group together, hand sow the seeds in the field, or if technology allowed, there began to be they'd still plant one at a time, but it was easy. They didn't have to carry the seeds and they could just pop them into the soil. So during this time, as you can see by the graphic down here in the lower right, we're focusing on corn now. During this time, the technology allowed farmers to produce 100 bushels of corn, which I believe is 56 pounds of corn. This production was done in about 75 to 90 hours of labor, and this includes the entire process. So that is the preparation of the field, the planting of the seeds, maintaining it through the growing season, and harvesting it in the fall time. So 100 bushels of corn was produced in about 75 to 90 hours of labor, and it required about 2.5 acres of land to accomplish. And so this was a large task for farmers in the 1800s to take on, as 1 acre could be planted in the span of an entire workday. We will get into what 1 acre can be planted in a few slides, but this was incredibly intense labor for farmers in the 1800s. In fact, typically it was used 2 oxen and a yoke team and up to 3 people to plow just 1 acre, the size of a football field, in one day. And one person would steer the oxen, one person would lead the team, and then there would be one person dedicated to cleaning the blade, allowing the blade to slide smoothly through the soil. Moving on into the next generation, the next century, the 1900s offered an incredible agricultural revolution to farmers. By this time, the turn of the century, farmers made up to 38% of the American labor force. And that is an incredible number, and it is still overwhelmingly high today, the percent of workers that are in the agricultural work field. So in the 1900s, droughts, depression, and the New Deal opened new doors for agriculture. Again, here are some of the milestones that affected and shaped agriculture as we know it today that occurred throughout the 1900s era. The first we will touch on is the 1930s Dust Bowl, and this photo here is actually taken from the Minnesota Historical Society. It's depicting a dust cloud forming over Minneapolis during this time. So essentially, in a perfect storm of short-sighted farm practices and extreme drought in the United States, in just a matter of decades, the rich prairie soil that once covered the area and took millennia to form was lost under the mechanical use of plows and the failure to steward the soil from harvest to harvest. So that immense crop production and that boom of crop production in the 1800s really cemented what would turn into the Dust Bowl era. And before I actually get into that, I'm going to rewind to the 1800s, just to make sure. Nope, I thought I missed something, but we are good to continue. Oops. And so again, that Dust Bowl really cemented how we need to pay more attention as stewards of our land to what we are doing and the future impacts that may have. So the result of this was that farmers recognized that there was a change needed and adopted practices like crop rotation and others that we will touch on in later slides. But this is incredibly important because just as we traced back a majority of the goods we use just simply to agriculture, we can trace back about 95% of just the food we consume straight from the soil. And so you can see how that is an exceptionally important natural resource to protect. And the Dust Bowl highlighted how important that was to protect. So farmers were able to increase their stewardship of the land after the result of the Dust Bowl. Now moving into the mid-1900s, power farming took hold of the American landscape. And so tractor companies started producing tractors like International Harvester and John Deere, which revolutionized the farming industry. Farmers no longer had to use people or animal-powered technology to cultivate their land. They had it easy. They thought it was much easier in this time to be using a motorized tractor to cultivate and harvest their land. The International Harvester Farmall was marketed as the machine that could farm all and was made eventually more accessible to farmers. And so again, they did not have to be using those people or animal powered techniques. The complementary machinery and implements that went along with these motorized tractors and machinery was also becoming popular and was able to be used. And then this motorized equipment led to a decrease in the crops grown for horse and mule feed. So such as oats, the land that was dedicated to that land could be repurposed into more profitable cash crops that could be resold then, because farmers were no longer needing to use that land to feed their livestock, which was cultivating their land. Now this photo up here is a photo of something called the Massey Harris Harvest Brigade. And in 1942, the Harvest Brigade was implemented as a reaction to the need for more wheat and food during World War II. And so during this time, rationing materials and supplies became imminent, and farmers, producers of agricultural equipment, could no longer get their hands on some of those materials like steel to build these pieces of equipment. And so what Massey Harris did was they created a deal with the War Production Board, and they said, if you provide us the steel to produce these pieces of equipment, we will contract 500 farmers to farm wheat for us, harvest wheat, and they will be contracted for no less than 2,000 acres of harvested land. And so that's exactly what they did. And it was incredibly successful for Massey Harris. They were the first self-propelled combine on the market. John Deere did not catch up to them for a few years later. And Farm America is actually lucky enough to have one of these historic combines in our collection. And again, you are more than welcome to come visit and see that specific piece of equipment upon your visit. Moving into the later stages of the 1900s, we have extreme advances in technology. So we're talking about equipment technology earlier, and now we are talking advances as small of a scale on a genetic scale. And so in the 1980s, plant geneticists had long been exploring plants' genes, looking for valuable traits and how they could be controlled. And so one of the first ways that they did that was by selective breeding. And so crossbreeding specific plants and combining those traits to create a new and improved variety. And if anyone is familiar with the Honeycrisp apple, that I believe is the exact way that that apple was produced, by crossing two specific types of apples to create that sought after variety. And so once these specific genes are isolated, they work to improve the breeding methods of these plants so that future generations can benefit from these traits that farmers and consumers want. These traits can be as simple as taste, to provide good taste for consumers. The Honeycrisp apple is an excellent example. They can be as complex as offering a crop that is insect resistant drought tolerant, herbicide tolerant, other diseases and resistant to that, or enhancing its nutritional value. And additionally, reducing food waste. So allowing crops to be grown so that they brown or go bad slower, essentially, and that we reduce food waste because that makes it consumable to us for a little bit longer period of time. Currently, biotechnology is an umbrella which kind of describes some of the work that we are doing with seed technology today. One of the most popular and probably most publicized is the genetically modified organism, or GMO. And so a GMO crop, as you can see on the screen, is developed using techniques that enable us to take the trait that we are looking for from one organism and transfer it to a crop plant. And so their specific example here is a trait that is located in a bean plant that is desirable can be taken and transferred into a crop plant. So say this is insect resistance in this specific variety, they can transfer that and make this corn plant into an insect resistant variety. Currently, there are only 10 GMO crops commercially available in the United States today, and they are listed below. So field and sweet corn are both available as a GMO product. Soybeans, cotton, canola, alfalfa, sugar beets, the papaya, squash, apples, and potatoes are all the 10 varieties of GMOs that are available in the United States. So if you are looking at your Himalayan sea salt on your counter and it says GMO free, it better be, because I don't think that salt is a commercially available GMO, and I don't think it even could be, because technically it doesn't have those genes that we would transfer. So this was a huge leap forward in technology for farmers and folks working in agriculture, and it continues to be today. Technology of the 1900s, this is mainly focused towards the later 1900s. The turn of the century was transformational in US agriculture, again, as we saw at the beginning of the century in the 1900s. Moving towards the 2000s was, again, transformational. So as you can see again here, by 1987, we have reduced the production time for 100 bushels of corn to less than 3 hours of labor. So in less than 100 years, that production time was exponentially decreased, and the number of acres needed to grow that amount of corn has also decreased to less than 2 acres just by the year 1987. So just in a little under 100 years, that was made possible by some of these agricultural innovations. One of them being auto steer. So it was invented just in time for the turn of the century in 1999. And this satellite-based technology essentially allows the ability to work in poor visibility conditions, and it reduces the amount of skipped rows or overlapped rows, allowing farmers to spend less on seed and utilize all of their seed to their full potential. And it lowers the operator fatigue. And so this auto steer system essentially uses satellites and GPS to guide a tractor. It is not fully automated. The driver does still have to be in the cab, but it follows the path that is created by the GPS along this line here. And that tractor will follow that path, whether they are plowing the field, planting in the field, or harvesting in the fall. They can put a prescription into the GPS equipment that is on the tractor so that the tractor will follow that path, no matter what part of the cultivation process they are in. Another agricultural innovation is moving
Sammy, I
towards,
think you cut out again.
oh, where did I leave off, Abby?
That the tractor will continue to follow that path.
Oh, sure. Yes, so the tractor will continue to follow that path no matter what stage of the cultivation process a farmer is in. And so they can transfer that GPS prescription from from tractor to combine, and it will follow that prescription path no matter if they are planting or harvesting. Another innovation that allowed us to reach this incredible number, lessening the hours of labor and the amount of acres required, is how many rows can be planted at a time. So specifically the number of hours of labor that it took to plant these rows. And so in the 1800s, we know that they were planting rows of 1 to 2 rows at a time, increasing as time went on. by the 1990s, we are able to produce, this is specifically a 36-row planter. This is a more modern day picture of how many rows we can plant, but this allows folks to increase the land stewardship and sustainability far beyond the oxen yoke, and it allows us to decrease that time it takes to produce those 100 bushels to the amount it would have taken in the 1800s, 1 acre per day. We can do that now in a mere matter of minutes, and it's incredible to see. Those are a few of the innovations in the 1900s. Now moving into today, we have a completely new way to ag, is how we like to say it, and focusing on stewardship and sustainability. So as you can see, agriculture has evolved and it will continue to evolve with new innovations and data and research emerging daily. We are going to highlight some of the recent developments in agriculture, again, that are far more advanced than the oxen and the yoke. Specifically, stewardship of the land, and this can come in many, many forms. And one of those, or a few of those forms are highlighted here. So close to home, again, we have learned to utilize space. So instead of growing outwards, we can grow upwards now. So Living Greens in Faribault, Minnesota utilizes aeroponic farming in a vertical setting. So they are farming leafy greens in a vertical setting, requiring less space and allowing more plants to be grown in a smaller amount of space. Other methods that we can use to lead to sustainability and increase stewardship are conservation tillage. Specifically, one that we practice at Farm America is called strip tilling. And what this does is it just tills only the portion of land that a seed will be placed, and it leaves the remainder of the crop from the previous years on the surface of the land. This can decrease in erosion and keep that important topsoil intact. It again only disturbs the soil where the plant will need to be growing. We are thankful to have a partnership with environmental tillage systems, again, out of Faribault. Faribault has some amazing things happening. And this specific implement is their Soil Warrior. And this will do the job of plowing or tilling that single strip of land where the seed will be planted. Another practice that we enjoy at Farm America is cover crops. Our site manager has been experimenting with this and has found great results from the use of cover crops on our land. What this does is it can regenerate or reintegrate nutrients and the necessary nutrients into the soil. It helps maintain the soil structure by introducing additional root systems into the soil, and it can regulate the temperature and moisture levels, avoiding similar fates to the Dust Bowl. And one of the biggest agricultural advances is precision agriculture. And so here is a depiction of land that has been analyzed. I'm not sure exactly if it has been analyzed for one of the variety of mapping tools that you can use, but this is how they would split a few acres into a variety of squares, and different colors can denote different things depending on what you're measuring. One of the portions under the precision agriculture umbrella is something called variable rate technology. And this can determine the appropriate amount of fertilizer or pesticide to spray in any one field and the appropriate amount and exactly where it needs to be applied. This can also be applied to seeding practices. So farmers will first look at their land and see where the land is most lucrative, and they can decide from there where their seeding efforts should be focused. This is done again by GPS. So these GPS prescriptions are created and they can instruct the implements essentially where to put and exactly where to put these applications or seeds. These mapping tools can be used by tractor. So you can physically map the area by tractor. You can also physically map the area by foot, although I think the other methods are more popular, specifically by foot for soil sampling. Sampling a variety of areas in the field to determine what level of nutrients are there and determining what applications of nutrients will be necessary in certain portions of the field versus others. And that again saves on farmer labor, farmer input, and it's ultimately saves in the land, because why put something that is already there in abundance if it is not needed? And soil sampling can instruct us on that. Other tools farmers can use are drone systems, And so those can get an overview of the field and provide precision ag specialists with the data that they can keep track of field characteristics over time. So they can compare them from year to year and compare things such as the yield and the productivity of the field, depending on what they were growing, the soil quality, and irrigation conditions. And I know in some of our partnerships, they have been able to take a look over Farm America's field and discover we need new tile put in and new drainage systems in our field, because they were able to see that our crops were not performing as we would have liked to see in that specific area of the field. And we were able to take that data and move forward with ways that we can mitigate that. Those are just a few of the stewardship practices that can be brought about thanks to the technological advances, specifically GPS. GPS can be found in these mapping practices when planting or tilling for cover crops, or tilling for planting in the spring or tilling in the fall again. GPS is instrumental in all of these. And now, what does ag technology look like today and into the future? We have been able to utilize auto steer in tractors. Again, this is different than autonomous tractors, but using auto steer, GPS mapping, and coordinates, the tractor or combine automatically steers over the data points given. And so this can occur from tilling to planting. And you can see from the inside of the cab of this implement, I believe it is a tractor, how much advancement has occurred in this technology and how many buttons there are to push and screens that you can view this data on. And it is much more comfortable to be in a enclosed cab of a tractor, I can imagine, than behind two oxen. Another agricultural advancement that we have been able to see firsthand at Farm America is the invention and implementation of completely autonomous implements. And so this autonomous tractor at Farm America was tested in 2019. And I will play just a quick clip of what that looks like. You can see inside the cab, I'll mute it, but you can see inside the cab, it is running and functioning completely without any humans inside the cab. And this can be done again by GPS prescription, or I'm sure it can be done by and monitored by a farm worker that is just not physically in the cab, but can be monitoring that from an exterior location. So this particular research was done at Farm America across southern Minnesota. And this technology, researchers were able to plant over 500 acres in a day without getting behind the wheel at all. So we are going from the 1800s, spending one whole day with 3 people behind 2 oxen just to plant 1 single acre, the size of a football field. And now today we can accomplish this requiring no human interaction, and we can do 500 acres in one day. This now can lead to our measurements of 100 bushels today. In today's agriculture, we can utilize 100 bushels of acre, plant it, process it in less than 2 hours of labor, complete from start to finish, and utilizing less than 1 acre of land. So the reason for this less than 1 acre is plants have become able to produce more. We've been able to implement practices where we can grow more plants in smaller spaces, and just plants production has increased drastically since the beginning of our story here in the 1850s. Let's see here. So an overview of the timeline, we started in the 1850s and what that 100 bushels looked like and what it took to get that at the end of a season. The total amount of labor and the total amount of acres. And then we can see throughout the time frame, the years, how that has changed and transformed into what we know and can utilize today. So thanks to all of these innovations in land stewardship and sustainability, in just under 200 years, farmers are now able to produce the same amount of products using 60% less land and in a fraction of the time. These early settlers and subsistence farmers to the from these early settlers to the agricultural innovations of the 20th century, farmers were able to feed an average of 26 people. So by the time settlers arrived in the 1850s, they were farming for themselves, feeding 1 family a year. By the 1960s, farmers were feeding an average of 26 people families per year. Now we have all of
Sammy,
these.
I cut out again. So the last thing we heard was 1960s farmers were able to feed about 26 people.
Yes, 26 people per year. Now in today's agricultural world, one single farmer can produce enough food to feed 166 families annually. So in 1 year, thanks to all of this innovation in technology. These innovations and changes happened from a genetic level to a general operation of entire farms level. And all of these innovations and new technology has made this possible in just 75 years, less than 75 years, excuse me. With that, we can see how big of an impact agriculture has on our daily lives. And to circle back to the percentage of farmers that were part of America's labor force in the early 1900s. Now, about 10.9% of total US employment is related to agriculture, from full-time to part-time jobs, which is an incredible number when you really think about it. 1/10 of America's workforce is related to agriculture. And so from the ties that agriculture has to the everyday products in our lives, to the ties that we can see in employment in the United States. It's an incredible number, and the innovations are outstanding in just under 200 years altogether. And with that is the conclusion of my mapping of agricultural innovations throughout history. And I can share this last slide here. Again, my name is Sammy Meyer, the program director at Farm America. Jessica Rollins is our executive director, who happens to be on the call still. Our contact information is listed here, as well as where to find more information about our guided tours, any of the information on our practices at Farm America, or if you just want to follow along with what we are doing each and every day, our social media can be found at Farm America as well. With that, I can open up with questions. I think I saw a few comments in the chat.
Yeah, the one comment in the chat was me answering your question earlier, saying that
Perfect.
I had some sheets of paper next to me.
Oh, excellent. Lovely.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, feel free, like we said at the beginning, to put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask Sammy directly, we're happy to have that happen too. And while we wait for those to roll in, Sammy, I had a question that you mentioned earlier about how pens are tied to agriculture. And I'd never thought of that before. Could you elaborate on that a little bit further?
Sure, absolutely. Specifically, it can be tied to agriculture and natural resources. And so I think it depends on the pen and the ink in the pen. But specifically, printed ink on bingo cards is a product of soybean production. And so Jessica may be able to answer this question more in depth, but I do know that the soybean or the ink printed on bingo cards comes specifically from soybeans. And I assume that that can be transferred to pen ink as well. I recently had a student ask me if they used octopus ink before they were able to develop. I said, I don't think so, but it could very well have been a very expensive form of ink. And I'm thankful that ink is inexpensive now, thanks to soybeans. But then in addition to that, the plastic that's used in pens can be sourced from natural resources. And part of that land stewardship comes not only with agriculture, but taking care of those natural resources as well.
Okay, and then it looks like Ruby has a question.
Yes, I was raised on a farm in Washington County, and my grandfather established the farm in about 1899. I have a question about the cost for farmers. We hear about the fabulous machinery. The machinery must cost a lot, and I've heard from time to time about the financial challenges that these farmers have now. Could you speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. And I might defer to Jessica because she has a bit more experience directly in answering that specific question. But you're absolutely right. These pieces of equipment are extremely technologically advanced, and they don't come at an inexpensive price in some cases. Jessica, would you be willing to jump in and share a little bit about your experience or your knowledge on that?
Yes. And I also should follow up with you guys in an email with some more specific numbers to make sure that what I say is correct. So I grew up on a farm in Southeast Minnesota, and I'm married to a farmer who farms with his dad and his brother over south of Mankato. So it is expensive. And there's a question also in the chat about how many pieces I think of equipment are needed. So I think those kind of tie together. So I just did a quick count. So if a farmer were to use the soil warrior that Sammy showed in that picture doing that strip tillage, that is an incredible piece of equipment that actually takes the place of several other tillage pieces of equipment. So if a farmer were to choose to use the soil warrior, that will work the ground, and it also will apply fertilizer at the same time to the soil, just in that row where the seed is going to need it. So that will take place of at least probably 2. So sometimes farmers will work the ground in the fall, sometimes they'll work it in the spring to prep the soil and kind of mellow it out after the crazy winter that we had. So that would be 2 different pieces of tillage equipment, but the soil warrior will do it in just one. The soil warrior also can be that fertilizer spreader of sorts to apply that fertilizer. So that would take away the spreader. And then there would be the tractor to pull it, and a combine to harvest, and possibly some type of equipment to spray if there was a fungicide they wanted to apply to prevent diseases on the plants, or if there were some spots they needed to spray to reduce some of the weed cover that was in there. So they would need a sprayer, and they would need a planter to plant the crops. So tractor, planter, tillage, combine, sprayer, spreader. So that's 6 pieces of equipment that they would need. But some of these things they won't have to own. They can share with their neighbors, or they can also hire a company like Crystal Valley Co-op, or oh gosh, there's like a zillion, or CFS or Ag Partners. A lot of those places will come in and do some of that custom work, the spraying and the fertilizer as well. So you maybe wouldn't need those pieces of equipment. So that kind of answers that. Is you'll have someone in a tractor doing some tillage, while someone in a tractor is also doing the planting. So then you might need multiple tractors because they have different horsepower. And a tractor can cost anywhere from like $50,000, kind of just do some little hobby stuff, up to $200,000. And then you have the combine. So that's going to be your harvester, and you're going to need that once a year, but when you need it, and it's hard to share with your neighbor because they need it at the same time. And that's going to be several $100,000 as well. And then you're going to need the head on the front of it to combine the corn, and that's going to be probably $200,000. And they're going to need the head to combine the soybeans because they process differently through the machine, and that's another couple $100,000. So there's a lot of money just in iron. And then there's going to be the expense for the seed, and a bag of corn seed. And these are, I need to write this down because I should get this for you because I don't know the answer. But a bag of corn seed can cost anywhere from $200 to $400 a bag. But then your question is going to be, well, how much does the bag do? And that's what I'm not sure about. I just know it's expensive. So I will find that answer and share that with you because that's another expense that they have. And then the fertilizer, and some of the ways that they can reduce some of their costs would be what Sammy had mentioned with precision agriculture. So to do that soil sampling, to know exactly what nutrients their soil needs in exactly the right place, and then apply it. So you're not over applying the fertilizer. So you're not paying for more than you need. You're putting it right where you need it, when you need it. And that's going to save the farmer money, and it's better for the land to do it that way as well. So there's a little bit of cost saving if you're implementing some of that precision agriculture. But of course, that technology comes at a price as well. So you have to pay somebody to do some of those soil sampling and send the test results to a lab. And then somebody, if you don't know how to do the mapping yourself, then you have to have someone help with that. But all the farmers I know do it because they love it. You know, there's just something in them that you can't get it out of them. My husband used to work at an office job, and it was just, that was enough. We're 30 some years old, and he's like, now it's time. We gotta be all in because he loves it so much. He can't be in the office anymore. So even when there's pretty years and you don't make a ton of money because the crops aren't worth a lot, they still do it. it's like you're banging your head against the wall. You can understand that, Ruby, too, if your family has a background in farming, that there's something in them that they love about it. So that was super long. Sammy posted something in the comments that I bet has more answers.
I just shared, and I think it ended up actually going directly to you, Jessica, so I can share it with everyone, but it is just a very brief PDF sharing a little bit about an estimation of how many acres can be planted per bag of corn typically. And the answer is not super simple. It depends on what you decide you want your planting population to be per acre. So farmers can decide to plant closer rows together. Corn kernels can be planted closer together. It depends on the farmer's preference, but an estimation is that they can do about at a rate of population of 26,000 plants per acre, they can plant about 3 acres per bag. I hope that's helpful.
And then we did have a couple questions come in on the chat. So going back to that original Oxen, did I freeze?
Nope, you're back.
Okay. So going back to that original work with using oxen and stuff, are there currently any farms in Minnesota that either of you are aware of that are primarily using animals for working in the field?
I don't believe any not large scale
Mm-hmm.
operations. I think it's mostly done for demonstration purposes still today, which does result in usable and utilizable crops still, but I don't believe that anyone is doing, and I could be wrong on that, this is my speculation. I know the Oliver Kelly farm has and utilizes oxen on their farmstead. That may have changed over the course of time with COVID. I know that our farm animals, we had to pause them for some time just because we weren't sure how many visitors we were going to be able to have at that time. So that may have changed for them, but like I said, I could be wrong and I will be humble if I am wrong, but I don't believe anyone in Minnesota does large scale operation with primarily animals. Aside from, I should mention, I'm sure there is population of people such as Amish populations who do decide to use animals as their source of power still. As I should correct myself, commercial operations, not that I know of. So then yes, there are farm operations that would be using animals still.
So do you guys use your farm animals to plow and do other farm-like things?
We do not. We do not have oxen on site at Farm America. Currently, we have 2 heifers, which are dairy production related. And so they have not had calves yet. So they are for us to share agricultural education knowledge with our students and visitors that come during the summer. In the fall time, typically things quiet down. And so we return those 2 heifers to their farm to be cared for there. And then we do also have 3 feeder pigs on site right now. So we'll care for them and raise them throughout the summer before they are returned to their owner who donated to us to be on display this summer and to help us teach those agricultural education pieces to students and visitors. They will be returned to their donor by the end of the season. And then we also have laying hens. They produce eggs for us throughout the season. And one of our most exciting new ventures this year is we have 2 lambs, and they will be cared for by an FFA student locally. And he will get to have his learning opportunity thanks to Farm America being able to provide space to care for those lambs.
All right.
Abby, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm wondering if you've been getting more inquiries or hearing more from kind of people interested in getting into farming from that are not the traditional folks. So for example, like maybe Hmong or other immigrant groups, because I know here in Rochester, there's a lot of interest in personal gardening for personal use, but it seems to be maybe even growing to be like a market garden as well. And I'm just wondering if you're hearing any interest from immigrant populations or new American populations.
Sure, absolutely. That's a great question. Specifically, we haven't been contacted or reached out to by any of those demographics, specifically in relation to what we do, but we want to help amplify that story and tell that story as best we can in whatever manner that we can. So one of our initiatives coming up, you're getting a sneak peek. We're wanting to implement something called Everyone Can Ag. And so showing and showcasing those stories that it's not necessarily what you stereotypically may think of when you think of farming and agriculture as a man in a field with a tractor and a big red barn behind him. There are other methods of agriculture that can be utilized and other people that can also participate in agriculture as well. So short answer, we haven't heard anything specifically. We haven't been contacted specifically, but we are aware that that is a growing interest by many populations, and we hope to share that story as best we can and as best we are able to.
I just assumed you needed a big red barn before you could start any form of agriculture.
You know, at one time that may have been the case.
We did have another question come in from the chat. So again, going back to those early settlers, did they use any Native American practices when they first arrived to start harvesting and using the land, or did they already have their own practices established?
Sure. Jess, I saw you unmute. Are you eager to answer this one?
I will let you take it. I would only be able to make assumptions about it. I'm not 100% sure if folks in this Waseca area listened and learned from the indigenous folks. I would just have been assuming that white people came and tried to plant corn, and folks who were here before said, here are some practices that work, like you can also do your beans right next to it, or some type of vining crop that will be able to grow up the corn. But that is just an assumption. I'm not 100% sure that is a true story. So Sammy, what have you found in your research? Or maybe you guys on the call also have the answer for us to that.
Yeah. In, I think, assumptions and speculation that there have been occurrences where settlers did in fact listen and learn. And then there are also other pieces of information that I have read that the Native American people were the first people here. Treaties weren't always collaborative, I will say. And so because of that lack, and this is using very general terms, so please forgive me, because of that lack of, for lack of a better term, collaboration, Native Americans were not, vacated the land by force or by their own decision, choosing not to be there when folks were coming to become stewards of what they had previously known as their land. Because that happened and it wasn't always a listening and learning experience, I have read that settlers' first few years, settlers' first few years were not easy because they were not accustomed to the type of soil that they found in our region, and they did not know what crops grew well in our region. And so they had a very difficult few first years when it was trial and error, again, for lack of a better term. And so I'm sure there was listening and learning opportunities, but then I'm sure there was also the latter as well.
A lot of the trend lines that you've talked about could be interpreted as saying that at some point in time, there'll just be one or two giant corporate farms with a lot of technicians working for them. Is there anything about the new techniques and technologies that suggest to you that it would help preserve the kind of existing farming that we have, the sort of existing level of people involved in farming? Does it all have to consolidate into bigger and bigger farms?
I will speak from my family's personal farm experience, which isn't everybody's experience. So I am hopeful that the technology can help my family and the land that we have, can help us improve our quality of life that we have. So my husband doesn't spend 2.5 months out harvesting. Because of the technology, he can get some of that stuff done faster and spend more time with our 3 and our 5-year-old daughters. And I think there's a lot of farmers out there who are like us in that 100 acres to 5,000 acre family folks who really still love what we do and will hold on as long as we can. And there's no way we would sell out to any other farmer larger than us. We have our 2 kids and our nephews and nieces who want to possibly farm as well someday. So we may want to acquire additional land to help them farm. And as that passion stays there, I don't think that that getting bigger is a bad thing, because getting bigger helps us sustain our family's passion to farm and take care of this land. But I know exactly where you're coming from, what you're saying, that it can feel very scary when you hear of large companies or just random people who have tons of money just buying lots of land so they can rent it out to other people who maybe don't have that same passion. And I know that that is a concern of my husband's as well, that we want to make sure the folks who love their jobs continue to get to do them on the land that they want to be taken care of. So automation, I hope, can help us to be better stewards, and also to help us save time and be safer on the land. You're right, it doesn't take as many kids. We don't have to have 10 children now to walk behind the oxen to help. So and it does require less people. Maybe we all will end up inside. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know. Mark, what do you think? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm not knowledgeable enough to offer an answer. I grew up in eastern North Dakota, and I just know that all the small towns just keep getting smaller until they blow away. There's a certain level of town which is there's some threshold where they survive. They've got a good enough school and maybe a hospital, all the other accoutrements. But everything below that level just gets smaller and smaller until it goes away, because there's just fewer people. There's fewer people working the land, so you don't need towns. Not many.
We do hope that some of the programs that we offer at Farm America help encourage the youth in this area to see the career opportunities in agriculture, that it's not just the farmer, that it's also the person doing the transportation, that it's the food scientist, that it's the person doing the graphic design work for the packaging of Sammy's Juicy Fruit Gum, and helping them realize that there's value in staying in your area. Like, sure, go where you need to, travel where you need to, but there's value in coming back to some of these smaller communities, because you can find good jobs. And especially now, we've discovered so many of the jobs can be done remotely, that you don't have to be in the Twin Cities, living downtown, working at a PR firm to be doing the graphic design for Juicy Fruit. You can be doing that from your smaller community, getting an awesome education for your children at a smaller school district. But what we're working on at that level, working with junior high and senior high students to help them realize this potential, is going to take years for us to actually see if it's making a difference if the students come back to this area. But yeah, there's small towns around Waseca as well that the main streets are just a little emptier than they used to be. But people still want to live in the country, it seems like. We don't want to have to be crammed on top of each other in apartments in the city. We still like that outdoor space, but then we drive to a larger town to work. So it's different than it used to be.
Speaking of small farms and trying to maintain them, is there any sort of organization or group that is out there to help small farms keep their farms going without having to sell out to like those big companies or those big factories? Is there like an infrastructure system in place for that?
That's a really good question. I don't know if there's specific organizations that are helping. I think farmers who feel that way hopefully are able to work with their banks so that they're in a financial situation where they don't have to feel like they need to sell out. I think the average size of Minnesota farms remains under 1,000 acres right now. So there's still a lot of, on average, farms are in Minnesota are almost all family owned and operated. I think, Sammy, correct me if I'm wrong, the stat is like 95% of US farms are family owned and operated. And I think Minnesota is less than 500 acres for average farm size. So, and that to me seems small. So my family is supporting three, my husband, my brother-in-law, and my father-in-law. So 3 families, and we have 2,000 acres, some of which we own, some of which we rent from folks. We also diversify in that we have a construction business, but and do some custom farming for other folks. But that is sustaining our family of 3 families, I guess.
Great, thank you. And there was a question that came in earlier. So I know for farming, it's important to do crop rotation, so that way you're not constantly using the same crop over and over and depleting the soil. Are there any examples or the possibility of using animals during that rotation? So having, I don't know, sheep, goats, cows out grazing in a field, and then later using that field to grow crops?
Yeah. Sammy, you want to answer it or do you want me to answer it?
I'm sure there are plenty of examples of that, because I know some of the byproduct. I'll start and you can kind of add on. The byproducts of those animals are used for fertilizers. So turkey litter, chicken litter is what their excretes are called, and the bedding that is mixed with that can be used as a fertilizer in fields. And so I have heard of, I can't quite recall off the top of my head, and this would be a smaller operation. I don't think this happens on quite such a large scale, but essentially free range chickens, and they let the chickens roam on that amount of land for X amount of time and produce enough litter to directly go into the soil, and then they can use those nutrients that are deposited by those animals to grow crops later. And then I'm sure there are other methods as well. Jessica, do you want to add on that, or do you have any specific examples?
No, that is true. You can rotate cattle, beef cattle, or if you wanted to do other outdoor livestock, you can rotate them through. I have not personally experienced it so much on our farm. My family grew up my folks farm down by like the Lanesboro, south of Rochester area. So they rotate because of the hills that they have. They rotate corn, soybeans, and alfalfa. And so then that's not necessarily rotating the livestock, but it's an additional crop that you can feed to livestock. So there's that, right? So that can become hay. But I do think, like Sammy said, there's value in their excrements being nutrients and fertilizer for the soil. So I can see that it would make sense to possibly take that alfalfa ground and take a ground, turn it into a grass for a while, some type of product for the livestock to graze, and keep rotating through. Another interesting crop that they're experimenting with rotating is industrial hemp, and that also fits into a corn and soybean rotation that you can add in. And then with some of the cover crops that you can plant within the corn and soybeans, then there's also, so typically with a cover crop, if you're not familiar, you will plant it when either the crop has just come off the field or you plant it right before kind of the crop comes off the field. We have cover crops kind of growing within our corn and soybeans at Farm America, just on a small chunk of land. And then you just get rid of them. You like till them under, or you spray them and kill them, and then you plant your next cash crop. But research that AURI, Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, and University of Minnesota SROC, so Southern Research Outreach Center, they do research on different cover crops that could be an additional cash option that also have some type of value when harvested, because it can become something else that we can use. So pennycress would be one of those that you can incorporate as a cash crop, and then also be able to harvest and have an income from and turn it into something else. Pennycress and I can't think of any of their names, Sammy. And I know I just terrible. I just said it on a webinar about them. So they're doing research to figure out what else you can rotate in And then it becomes how do you share that information with farmers, show them the research proof to them that this is of value to them personally. It's a value, it's another time piece that they have to figure out how to get the timing right to incorporate that cover crop, but it's valuable to the soil to do that, and it's valuable to them as a farmer. So then there's a little bit of a communication and trust opportunity for researchers to share that information to farmers so that they believe it's something they can incorporate on their farm. And then it's a generational thing where you have some folks who aren't quite ready to let go of how they've always been doing things. So they don't quite trust that this is the way that it can be done, even though there is some research to show that this can happen in your area, on your soil.
So we had Wayne put a comment in the chat. He used to work at one of Thomas Jefferson's former homes and says that Thomas Jefferson herded, or rather his slaves did, sheep into the garden to fertilize the large garden overnight. And I appreciate that we're all using terms like excrement and fertilize. We're just trying to keep it tasteful during the dinner hour. So also talking about new technologies and trying to produce the most crops that we can. Is there any sort of technology that isn't a pesticide or chemical that repels pests? So is there like a more natural or organic way to do that? Especially pests such as like mice, groundhogs that would damage the crops.
That is a great question, and I feel like it's a trick question because I bet somebody knows the answer to it, and I'm not sure that I
don't know.
The BT trait that is put into corn to make it resistant to corn rootworm, I believe, is actually fairly natural, and I don't fully understand it because it's beyond my level of science, but it's some type of toxin that can also be used in organic farming. So whether you have it incorporated into the seed already and then your corn becomes technically GMO, that corn seed then is releasing this toxin that these bugs get in their gut and makes them sick, and and that's that. But it also, I believe, and someone will probably need to correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it can be used by organic farmers almost as like a topical application to get rid of bugs. So, so I'm sure that there are sonic things as well that you can do, probably like sound emissions that repel pests. I'm not familiar with using those practices on my farm, but you guys have some really good questions.
Yes.
I love it.
Thank you. And I promise we are not trying to trick either of you at any point. We do not allow trick questions.
Stemming off of that, there is sonic things that you can use that sparked my knowledge of that. I think from my experience and what I've looked up in research, I had tried and wanted to incorporate it for a grant program at Farm America. We had wanted to do like community gardening type things with FFA students and showing them and engaging them in different types of agricultural practices. So that would be one of them, looking at some of those non-traditional ways to deter pests. And I was surprised to hear that that sonic sound was one of that was available to specifically deter rodent pests from small garden spaces. And it's like on the market, available, Amazon, you can purchase it today for your own home garden. As far as its efficacy, how well it's deters those pests, I have not further researched into that. But I have also seen a very interesting documentary, and I can't think of it. If you've also watched this interesting documentary, please do share. But they were a family that purchased a piece of land in, I believe it was Southern California, and they had to regenerate the soil. And so they started by regenerating the soil and making it finally arable for crops. And so once they did that, they started experiencing all of these issues with different types of pests. And so what their goal was to introduce a cohesive environment of different types of pests that basically take care of each other. So that's another interesting method. I think one of them was like snails crawling up their trees, and then the gophers, or maybe it was not gophers. Another animal would eat those snails, but that animal was also a pest. And so they had all of these different experiences with the cycle of life on a farm and maintaining a farm that's profitable still. So that's another interesting way to, I'm sure, experience those pest management systems. And as far as I know, that was on a small family level scale.
Yeah, I know I've seen some of those smaller farms where they'll like release chickens out into a field and the chickens will pick all the bugs off, but that's really not sustainable across 2,000 acres.
No, it isn't. And you jogged my memory. That's what it was. The chickens would eat the snails, and then they experienced issues with coyotes who would eat the chickens, and they had to work through what that problem solving looked like on their farm. It was very interesting.
Reminds me of that song of like there's a bird in the nest in the tree on the branch and it just keeps cascading down.
Yes, very cyclical.
Yeah. Are there any other questions for either Jessica or Sammy? Will we still have them on the line?
I do need to head out here in a bit to do some bedtimes for my 2 little girls, but I want to say, if any of you guys, I know it's kind of a hike from Olmsted County to Waseca County, but if you want to ride along with the farmer when they're out in the field and see what Sammy was talking about with the precision agriculture and the equipment, reach out to her or myself. We will connect you with a farmer. Most of the tractors today have little buddy seats in them, so you can sit in an air conditioned or a heated cab, depending on the season, and ride right next to them. We would love to help you make that connection, or if you have someone else in your life who might want to have that experience, let us know, and we can arrange that for free. And send other questions that you come up with, send them to us, and we will find experts who have the answers. So I do want to be able to send you more information on some of the costs of farm equipment and how to repel pests without chemicals, like how are other folks beyond what my family's doing, how are other farmers doing it? Because I know that there's organic, successful, productive organic farms that are 2,000 acres or more. So what are they doing? So I will find answers for that. And then I also will give Abby, somehow we'll figure out how to get you guys like a buy one, get one free coupon to come do a tour or something. So you feel like, even though it's kind of a hike, make a day trip out of it, drive on over and visit us, and we'll get you a discount on that tour of Farm America. So we appreciate you guys jumping on the call. I do have to jump off to do bedtimes, but which doesn't seem fair. The sun is still shining. They get so crabby about that, right? Thank you so much for joining us today. So with that, I do have to jet, but Sammy will sing you out. So
I will stick around if there are any lingering questions. Thank you, Jessica. But yes, like Jessica said, we are available to send additional information. I will send, if anyone is interested in this slide deck, I can send that as well as the sources that I used to retrieve some of the photos and statistical facts. I can provide those as well. If you are interested, I will send those over to Abby. And yes, I'm just thankful that you are all able to join us tonight, and you had very, very excellent questions. So thank you for sharing those. I think I saw a chat. Yes, I will send the slide deck to Abby.
Yep. Yes, if you send, Sammy, send all that stuff to me. I'll send it out tomorrow morning in our follow-up email, where we'll encourage you to join other calls, but we'll also make sure that you have all the resources that we talked about tonight. So we are going to wrap up here. And I want to say thank you so much to our audience for asking so many great questions, and also to our presenter for sharing both her and Jessica's very valuable time and expertise with us tonight. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's program and that you continue to join us in the future as we discuss everything from Antarctic exploration to the Confederate flag and so much more. Check out our website, olmstedhistory.com, to keep up to date on all of our events and programs. If you enjoyed tonight's program, consider making a donation to help us continue to offer this and other great programs, or consider becoming a member. A History Center of Olmsted County membership provides access to a wide variety of benefits, including access to free and reduced cost events like this. So again, thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.